Bet horse racing on DRF Bets. We'll match your first deposit of $200. Get free expert picks and past performances, plus weekly cash back. All from Daily Racing Form, the most trusted name in horse racing.
Hi everybody, Mike Beer here with the second of two graded stakes races on the turf at the Belmont at the Big A meeting on Saturday afternoon. Race number 7, the second of those graded stakes races, is for the 3-year-old colts. It's the Grade 2 Hill Prince, mile and an eighth on the turf course there. The purse, $300,000. We have a full field of 10, and here is that field right now. This Hill Prince, sort of a very well-matched field, bookended by a pair of, I think, very talented colts for trainer Shug owner Stuart Janney III. Celestial City is down on the rail. A horse who just feels like he just, typical Shug fashion, getting better with every single start that he makes. They have tried him in 3 stakes races previously on the grass. He's run well in all of them, hasn't won any of them. But he's been on the board every single time. The most recent of those was the Grade 3 Saranac up at Saratoga, where he just bumped into Annapolis in a very short field. He really had no chance to win that race. He wound up finishing second in a dead heat, has since bounced back out of that race with an allowance win that sort of should set him up, pretty well for a step back into stakes company here. The distance is no problem for him. He's got a great post on the inside. His stablemate is drawn to the opposite end of the starting gate. Post number 10, limited liability. A good 2-year-old for Shug. He came off the layoff 3-year-old debut back in April at Keeneland. A huge allowance win from last to first with a big, strong finish. Since then, 3 graded stakes tries. He's hit the board in 2 of the 3. Both of those races, the Pennine Ridge in June, the Virginia Derby most recently, both at this 9 furlong distance. He is a horse who has a good amount of talent. It does feel like he's getting better. He also just does not have very much speed at all. And it feels like, that combined with being drawn out in post 10, feels like that's the kind of stuff that could really work against him here, because we're going to take a look at the Timeform US pace projector right now. And Timeform US doesn't find a lot of speed in this Hill Prince field, even though there are 10 horses entered. It's the rare gray bar situation where they just feel like there's no speed in this race, and that could potentially compromise pretty badly a horse like Limited Liability. We'll see if it plays out that way. I won't, disagree and say that there's, obviously that there's actually a lot of speed in this race. I don't think that's the case, but I think there might be more speed than the pace projector is maybe giving some of these horses credit for. We'll see who decides to get aggressive and who doesn't. When you look at that pace projector, the 6 and the 7 are both expected to be forwardly placed. The 6 Be Better is a horse who's making his turf debut here, and certainly it feels like based on his first 2 starts off the layoff this year anyway, it feels like he could certainly be forwarded here. I kind of thought the more I looked at the race, the more I thought the number 3 Constitutional Lawyer could be a horse to get aggressive here. The pace projector has him sitting 5th towards the inside. I think if nothing else, this is a great spot for Dylan Davis and trainer Ray Handel to just get aggressive with this horse. He's run on turf 3 times previously. He didn't win any of those races. I think maybe he's run a little bit better on this surface than it may look like he has on paper. And I think it's also really interesting to go back to the only win of his career. He's 1 for 9. The only win did come over this distance at Aqueduct, but it was on a muddy, sealed main track, and they got really aggressive with him that day. They rode him out of the gate, sending for the lead. He got it, took on some pressure in that race, and just sort of kept going. And what was, I thought, a pretty impressive maiden win at the time. He hasn't won since then, but I do think he's run a little bit better in some situations than it may appear. And I feel like if they're going to run him in this race, a Grade 3 on the grass, I think you just got to get aggressive with them and try to make the early lead. We'll see if they decide to do that. Let's start with Celestial City, one of the horses we touched on in the Open. He's a major contender in here. I think he's a horse who could easily win this race. I don't think 9 furlongs is going to be an issue for him, even though he's never been this far before. Again, they've run him in 3 stakes races. He didn't win any of those races, but 89 and 88 in the 2 most recent graded stakes tries up at Saratoga. I thought he ran fine in those races. And last time they just gave him a little bit of class relief back to his available condition, entry-level allowance. He got a good trip in that race. He winds up winning by a head as the favorite. I personally thought he won the race a little bit easier than that. He was sort of, strongly handled at the end of that race, holding on. It never looked like he was going to get caught in there. Another good performance for this horse against older horses. He had also faced older horses prior to the Hall of Fame, back in June at Belmont. He went really well that day also. So I just think there's a lot to like about this horse. In typical Shug fashion, he keeps getting better with every start. He's got a great post here. I'm using this horse. Number 2, Grand Sonata, another horse I'm going to use in this race. And he's just, to me, he's just a little bit underrated. I don't think he's any kind of superstar, but it's been nothing but stakes races for this horse since he broke his maiden at the end of last year. That was on the main track, a race that was right off the turf. He actually ran really well that day. And he's been even better than that on turf since. He has not won a race since going back-to-back in his first 2 starts as a 3-year-old. They were both stakes races down at Gulfstream Park. And I thought he ran really well in both of those. I want to put up the replay of the most recent of those, though. That's the Grade 3 Kitten's Joy. And you'll see in this race, while he only wins it by a neck, he actually wins this race way easier than it may look like on paper if you didn't see the race. He's just totally buried in traffic all the way down past mid-stretch in here. And you can see Tyler Gaffalione, to his credit, just sitting very patiently and waiting and waiting and waiting. This horse will finally get a little bit of room in the late stages, and it'll just shoot up and win this race under very strong handling. I thought that was an impressive win. And while he hasn't won a race since then, he's run really well, and I think acquitted himself very well against, sort of some of the top horses in this 3-year-old turf division. A good 4th in the Belmont Derby back in July. I thought he ran okay last time over that Kentucky Downs turf course, going a little longer. Cutting back to a mile and an eighth there is no problem for this horse. He's very tactical. I think he's better than he looks on paper. And I just feel like he's one of those horses who never gets the respect he deserves. I'm using Grand Sonata, and I'll be very interested to see what kind of price he is at post time. Number 3 is Constitutional Lawyer, a horse who, that I was talking about before. I think they should just get aggressive with him here and see if they can, maybe get to the front in here and then just see how far they can take this field. He's 0 for 3 on turf since they switched over at Saratoga back in mid-July. But I actually feel like he's run a little bit better in those races than it may appear that he has. His most recent start in particular, they stretched him all the way out to 1 mile and 3/8 that day. And he got an overall good trip in there. Dylan Davis rated him from the start. He got to save a lot of ground, but he was never too far away. And when they got to the stretch, he had room up the inside, and he made a run. It was between calls, so you're not going to see it in the running line, but he got right up to challenge the horse on the lead. But he had to try to come through on the inside, and that horse just sort of tightened it up just enough where Constitutional Lawyer didn't get through. He bounced off the rail a little bit, and then he basically lost his chance there. I'm not suggesting that he was necessarily going to win, but he might have. And it was a good performance. Now, I don't think that was a particularly good field, but I do think this horse ran pretty well in there. And I just think he's really interested in here at some kind of big price. I couldn't ultimately get there, and I didn't put him on top, but at a big price, I'm going to use this horse in this race and see if they give him that aggressive ride that I think could really work to his advantage in this race. Next up, the number 4, Nantasket Beach. Very lightly raced, only 2 starts on turf since they've come back off the layoff at the end of August. He just missed in the first of those. He ran pretty well that day. Broke his maiden last time over a soft turf course at Delaware. He won that race very easily. It was only a 73 buyer. It did not look like a very good field that he beat. And so obviously this is a huge step up in class for this horse, but he's going to be some kind of really big price. And who knows, maybe he just has a big forward move in him for a very underrated trainer. St. Anthony is the 5. I like this horse. I just don't necessarily like him in this race. Going back, he is a prior stakes winner on the turf. That win mile at Golden Gate back at the end of May. That's a pretty good performance for this horse. He did not get a great trip in that race, but still managed to overcome it and win. They just sort of took him back early. His rider just committed to the inside as they came to the stretch of that race, and there was nowhere for him to go. And there a big wall of horses in front of him. He had to actually angle all the way to the outside to get clear, and it's not easy to keep your momentum up when you have to angle that far out, but this horse managed to do it, and then he still got up to win with a strong finish. I really liked that performance from him, and he has won a stakes race since then as well. I just don't really like the 2 times where I feel like they really tested him were in the Oceanside and in the Del Mar Derby 2 starts back, and I just didn't think he ran that well in either of those races. He is going to ship all the way across country here for trainer Neil Drysdale. That could be a positive sign for him, and I'm a fan of this horse. I just don't like him in this race. Be Better is the 6 up next. Trainer Todd Pletcher is going to switch this horse to turf for the first time. This horse has actually shown some ability on the main track. His only start as a 2-year-old came sprinting on Travers Day against Jack Christopher. He did not look like a sprinter that day, got totally outrun, but he was actually running at the end of that race and just missed second. I thought that was sort of an underrated performance. And then he came back off the layoff this year going long on the dirt. Really liked his maiden win first off the layoff. Thought he ran even better, winning his entry level allowance race in his next start with a 91 buyer. I thought he was going to be really tough in the Curlin. The last time we saw him, he was terrible in that race and was basically eased. Right after that Curlin, Todd Pletcher put this horse back on the work tab, and it was all turf works for this horse. So it feels like maybe they always had turf in the back of their mind for him. He does have a lot of turf in his pedigree. And so maybe this is just, they were waiting for an excuse to run him on the grass. And here, that was their excuse, a terrible performance in the Curlin. He's bred for this. If you look up Todd Pletcher and Formulator, he actually has some pretty interesting numbers with horses like this, especially over the past couple of years. Non-maidens, 3-year-olds, switching to turf for the first time in route races. He's 7 for his last 21. The ROI, a big 385, a couple of stakes wins in that sample as well. I think this is an interesting move for this horse, who I do think has some talent, and he has some turf pedigree, and he's got some speed. The distance is no problem for him. We'll see what kind of price Be Better winds up going off at. McKinnon, another horse who's going to ship over from Southern California. This is a horse who's going to make his first start now for trainer Chad Brown. Doug O'Neill had him early on. He was a really good 2-year-old last year, won 3 races in a row, 2 stakes races leading into the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf, and then he ran really well in that race also. Did not get a great trip that day, wound up just missing second behind Modern Games. That was a really good performance, but then after that, they tried dirt with him. That didn't really work out. They ran him in the El Camino Real on the all-weather surface at Golden Gate. I thought he was pretty disappointing there. To me, that's just a race, even if that's not going to be his surface. He's just supposed to win that race, and he got beat at 3-5. He's made 2 starts back on turf since they gave him a little layoff. I wasn't particularly taken with either of those performances either. He was also in that Del Mar Derby last time. I did not think he ran that well, and that was also at 1 1/8. 2 starts at 1 1/8. I don't think he's run his best race or even close to it in those 2 starts. I don't know. I thought there was a lot to be concerned about with this horse, and switching to Chad Brown to me just makes the price probably well below what I think I would need to take in order to bet this horse. I really liked him early on, don't like him as much now, and would want a big price. Unanimous Consent is next, also trained by Chad Brown, very lightly raced. Really liked, he won the first 3 starts of his career, and I thought he looked good winning all of them. Really strong finish in his stakes debut here at Aqueduct to win the Woodhaven. Personally, I didn't like the Woodhaven as an overall race. I did think this horse ran well in there, though. His next 2 starts are fine, but they're not great. The Pennine Ridge, he was right up close to a really slow pace and got out-finished for 3rd by Limited Liability, who to me clearly ran better than this horse did in the Pennine Ridge. A little bit of time off after that. He came back in the Virginia Derby last time, and once again behind Limited Liability. It was close between them, but I still thought Limited Liability ran the better race. He could win here. Certainly has forward to go for Top Connections. We'll see what kind of price he is, because he's another one I just wouldn't want to take too short a price on. Wicked Fast is the 9. We'll see what happens with him. He's a rock solid kind of horse. I don't think he's a stakes horse. They're going to press on here. He was claimed for $35,000, 2 back. They bumped him up into the Jockey Club Derby Invitational last time. I guess they just thought that he would be effective stretching all the way out in distance, and that just didn't really happen. He was no factor in there behind Nation's Pride. It's not like this is a ton of class relief for him. He's fine. I just don't think he's going to necessarily beat this field. He is Mike Maker now, though. Maker tends to have pretty good success with horses like this if you feel like you want to just take a shot at a price. Limited Liability, the 10, will close out the field. I'm a fan. Liked him as a 2-year-old. Really liked his 3-year-old debut at Keeneland, charging from last to first to win an allowance race. That was a really good performance, and I just think he's run fine. 3 graded stakes races since then, 2 of them at this 9 furlong distance, and I thought he ran well in both of those races. That Pennine Ridge, I mean, you could argue that he was even best in that race, trying to come from last into no pace and just making up a ton of ground late. He ran really well in there. Maybe didn't run quite as well last time in the Virginia Derby, but it still was an okay performance. I just didn't necessarily think he was ever in a really comfortable position there. Wound up sort of between horses around the final turn and then in tight in the stretch as he tried to rally. He wound up getting some room, and then he got out finished for 2nd in that race, but I don't know. I still thought he ran okay. I could use him in this race. I don't like the post. I don't like the fact that maybe this race won't set up great for his late running style. But I'm a fan, and I'm going to use him. I didn't put him on top in this race, though. We can go to the picks for this race now, because I am going to try the 6 Be Better. It's his turf debut. I don't think I would want too short a price on this horse, but I think he's talented. He's got turf pedigree. I feel like maybe this was what Pletcher was waiting to do for this horse, waiting to get him back on the turf. He's shown some ability. So I think if he handles the turf, he can go with these horses. And I put him over the 2 horses to the inside. I went 6-1 and 2. But this is a great race to just keep an open mind about and see how they bet it, because somebody might fall through the cracks here. You might wind up getting an overlaid price on a really strong contender in this Hill Prince. It's a pretty good race, though. Race number 7, Saturday afternoon, Belmont at the Big A meeting. It's the Grade 2 Hill Prince for the 3-year-olds on the grass, approximate post time 3:48 Eastern Time.